Hi, everybody. I am so excited to have you join us today. We were just talking, Patricia, Kaylee, and I, about how great it is that we are ending our season of Junction Reads with a very writerly focused conversation. Patricia's book, A Canadian Guide to Creative Writing and Publishing, is a must read, I think, probably a go-to reference book for a lot of writers moving forward. Patricia, welcome to Junction
Thank you.
Reads. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we officially get started, Patricia, Kaylee, and I are joining you from Toronto. Junction Reads exists in Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. Patricia Westerhof, thank you again for joining us. Before we officially dive in and I talk to everyone and share your biography, I would love to know what you're reading and what books you'd like to share with everybody.
So, I'm currently listening to a mystery that I think it's called IQ or Q or something like that. Just started it. And I am reading the latest Lucy by the Sea. It's the sequel to Lucy, My Name is Lucy Barton. And Yeah, so I have very eclectic reading tastes, and while we're on the subject of reading, I encourage everyone to read widely and not get stuck in only reading what you write. I think it's really, really good to have a wide range of reading to inspire your writing and see what's being published.
Yes, thank you for that. Um, Before I share your biography, I just want to invite everyone, if you have any questions for Patricia, please put them in the chat. Kaylee is going to collect the questions as we go and through my conversation with Patricia. And at the end, we're going to open it up to a discussion and a bit of a Q&A, at which point we're going to turn the Zoom onto gallery settings. As many of you may or may not know, this is posted to our public YouTube channel afterwards. So if you're not comfortable being on camera at the end, you can stay on camera now, but if you're not comfortable being on camera at the end, please feel free to turn your camera off. But we would love to see your faces also. Patricia Westerhof is the author of a short story collection, Catch Me When I Fall, and an award-winning novel, The Dove in Bathurst Station, and she is co-author of The Writer's Craft, a much-used book for student writers. Her forthcoming novel was a finalist for the K.M. Hunter Artist Award, a story inspired by her experience having to write an index. I'm excited to talk about that. Patricia, who holds an MA in education from the University of Toronto, is a speaker and sought-after writing coach, working with writers of all ages, from teens to seniors.
Thank
Very
you.
impressive.
Thank you.
I love Junction Reads. I love the 30 plus people who have registered for this event, because I think it's really important to build a literary community, whether it's a community of writers in your neighborhood or a community of writers online, on social media, wherever. I started Junction Reads because we had a little writers group and tons of writers living in the neighborhood of the Junction in West Toronto, but we didn't have a reading series. We didn't have a reading series. The closest one was the Brockton Writers Series. So I started Junction Reads, and I want to talk to you about the importance of building community, the importance of engaging with, if not just events like this, but with the people in events like this. Did you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, so-
Uh, yeah, yes, sorry. I was just getting distracted by chat. It's a Zoom thing.
Right.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think community engagement and finding writers, finding your own people, like that's an amazing thing. A thing like Junction Reads, and when people ask me about, how do you find critique partners? How do you find people who share your passion? Well, the best place is reading series, because you're going to find people who are as excited about the written word as you are, and people who are willing to, leave their houses or sign up for a Zoom meeting to get involved. And I think, sometimes writing can be a lonely activity, and finding people who share that interest and then forming groups with them. It's certainly how I got my writing from a very amateur level to a level where I could start sending things out for publication.
Mhm.
And also, one of the things I write about in the book is um, that a lot of the joy, like I think in for the people here in the audience who are in the very early stages of writing, sometimes you think that all you really want is publication. And then I think most of us who have had some success in publication, you realize that that joy it's there, but it's kind of fleeting. And the tremendous joy for me and most of the writers I know is connecting with like-minded people, and is that sense of community and people who read your work for sure, and connect with it, but also people whose work you can read and have that relationship with.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone here follows. I know you have our guest on Instagram, but she just posted a little thing on a little reel on her stories where she got asked a question at a festival this past weekend about essentially that, publishing, does that define you as a writer, or does the act of writing define you as a writer? And she very, very clearly said it's the writing, it's the actual sitting down and writing that makes you a writer. I'm going to talk to you about social media separate from this next question, because I think they're different. But in chapter 15, you say most writers, whether well established or just beginning, need feedback, encouragement, and companionship as they trek through their drafts. And as you just said, it is a solitary gig. For the most part, we're all sitting here all alone trying to get words out. But in getting friends and family to see your work, in sharing your work in a workshop, or even going as so far as to hire a beta reader to read either a story or a manuscript, I'd love for you to talk about the pitfalls and the positives about sharing your work to others. And I think you touched on that, whether it's revised enough for other eyes, but
Yeah, I think there are pitfalls that are just circumstantial, and there are pitfalls that you can control as a writer when you're seeking when you're ready to seek feedback. One thing that goes wrong is that you seek it too early. You haven't polished it enough yourself, and people are telling you things you already know you can make better, and you're wasting their time and probably your time as well. So having some time elapsed between writing it and revising it, so that you've got some objectivity and you've made it as polished as you can before you seek feedback, is avoiding that pitfall.
mhm.
Another pitfall is giving it to people who maybe don't read a lot and love you dearly, and they're just going to gush about it, and they're just going to say, this is amazing, can't
Yeah.
believe that you wrote this, and they're not going to give you useful feedback.
Mhm.
So, there's that happy balance of, you don't want somebody who's just going to crush it and say, this is terrible, grind their heel down on it. But you also don't want, sort of the equivalent of, I don't know, middle school peer editing when they get out pink scented markers and say great work,
Mhm.
and it's not useful. So yeah, a happy medium. And I think in the book, some of the tips I give of seizing control of that experience is, um, giving the people you ask to give you feedback a set of questions that you have about the manuscript. Maybe you're going to give them two versions of your opening or of a climactic scene,
Mhm.
or you're going to say, what do you think of this narrator? Do you find them sympathetic? Do they rub you the wrong way? Could you just let me know where you laughed? If you're trying to write something funny and you want to find out, is it funny? Just get people to tick where they laugh. So just thinking ahead of time, what's the feedback that you want, so that you're taking control of the process and making sure that you're getting specific feedback that's going to move you forward.
Mhm. Yeah, when we a couple of workshops I've been in, we as facilitator and both participant, we set it up as, here's a kind of summary, here's a take of the piece, and then here's a list of positives, and then here's a list of suggestions for revision. And I feel like you touch on that in the book and in what you're saying in questions, perhaps just say, tell me what you think it's about, tell me what you love about it, and then tell me how I can make it better, and then go from there. Because it's impossibly difficult as someone who's read work outside of a workshop, the work of friends. It's impossible to come up with, the suggestions for revision without feeling like you're going to hurt their feelings.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And before this, you and I never, to be perfectly honest, hadn't really thought about this as a negative, but you and I talked about this before, as we were preparing for this workshop event. You talked about social media and people sharing work on social media, whether it's a poem or an excerpt of a short story, or and I want to ask you this specifically, a very detailed synopsis. There's a binder seeking literary agent Facebook on Facebook, a page on Facebook. And sometimes the synopses and query letters that are shared by writers are very detailed. I want to talk to you about that, the positives and negatives of sharing your work on social media.
Well, the positive is like anything you share on social media, that you get immediate feedback, right? So we just talked about how writing is kind of a lonely, independent activity, and sometimes you just want somebody to say, "Hey, keep going. This is great. I love it." And so it can be very tempting to post on social media. I personally think there are more drawbacks than benefits. For one thing, even that feedback tends to be kind of superficial. It
Mhm.
may not be the audience for your work who is giving you feedback. It's just whoever happens to be on that social media. Now, if it's in a specific group, that could be different.
Mhm.
But more maybe more worryingly, um, sometimes you disqualify yourself from sending that piece out for publication or submitting it to contests. A lot of literary journals will consider your work published even if you just self-published it on your social media page.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of writers don't know that if you've put it out there, you've in a sense self-published the work,
Mhm.
and it might no longer be eligible for traditional publishing. So if that doesn't bother you, then that's great. It is a way to quickly get an audience, but you're not getting paid for it. It's not going to move your career forward.
Right. And that we had a discussion on a forum for a writing contest that I entered a few months ago. And a lot of people were posting their stories for feedback before the contest deadline. And I thought about that. I thought, well, you're essentially just posting your story, regardless of it being within a private forum that you have to register to be involved in. For me, and you say this in the book, if it exists on the internet, it's kind of out there and always out there, right? What do you think about that? People sharing even in a private Facebook group, because some of these Facebook groups are private. The difference in sharing your work in a private group versus sharing your work in a workshop, um, and giving access to it to a bunch of different people.
I think again, you just need to do it with eyes wide open. If you do it, you're
Mhm,
opening yourself up to plagiarism for sure, right? That people can quickly take that idea, share it. You don't have control over it anymore once it's up online. So, I know writers who don't tell anybody what they're writing until it's completely finished, and then they show it to a couple of people who that they trust before they send it to their agent or an editor, but they're
mhm,
very private about it because they want it to be their idea alone until they've worked it all through.
mhm,
So to me, that maybe seems like a bit of a safer thing to do than putting up, like I would never put up a whole query letter, for instance, online. I would send it to a few people I trusted for feedback,
mhm,
rather than just putting it out there. It seems to me dangerous. And then there's also something that, especially for very, very young writers. Sometimes I work with young writers, teenage writers, and with them too. Like once something is up online, it's there forever. And if you're very, your poem that's very much self-expression, angst ridden, the kind of stuff that many of us wrote in high school, is
mhm.
that what you want up there and out there 10 years later? so
Yeah.
so that's another thing to think about, is just that this becomes your legacy when people search your name,
Mhm.
that's out there.
Yeah, and I think I know the answer to this, but Janice has just asked, what about Substack? I think it's probably, in a similar world, but what are your thoughts on that? The kind of
Yeah.
broad newsletter, thing that's happening right now?
Yeah. I, I think a lot of this is your personal, your comfort level. And there are people who just produce work constantly. They blog.
Mhm,
They're so prolific, and they don't care. They're fine with just putting stuff out there. They'll write something different for that contest if that's already been sort of self-published. So yeah, I think it's your own comfort level, but
mhm.
you just need to be aware of what the ramifications are,
Yeah.
and cautious about it.
Yeah. And in talking about revision, and I have a question about that. Who knows if the story you've posted or the poem that you've posted is going to be anywhere near the end result, right? And so you may have posted something that isn't exactly what you wanted to say. And then when you come to the final draft, the final story, to the final poem, you look back at that thing that you posted and think, oh God, why did I share that? It was nowhere near ready.
I password protect my rough drafts because
Yeah. Oh, do
you
you? Oh
know,
yeah. Yeah.
so because
I
they're so radically different from what the final result would be.
yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that anyone should feel embarrassed by early work, but very many authors have said to me that they read very early work and they can't even believe that they wrote it. It's so incredibly different than an incredibly different voice to what they've nurtured and come to at the present time in their career.
Yeah, and the difference between something that is traditionally published is that it's curated and it goes through an editing process.
Hmm.
And I'm not at all against self-publishing. There's a chapter in the book on self-publishing, and I think some people do it very, very well.
Hmm.
But the danger with social media and some of these sites where you can just slap up your work is that it's not curated, and sometimes we just are so eager for some positive strokes that
Yeah.
we can be tempted to put something up that hasn't gone through enough revision, that we haven't gotten feedback on, and
Mhm,
later you look at it and think, oh, I can do so much better if I had just given myself more time, but it's
mhm.
too late, it's out there.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, and again, I do this all the time at Junction Reads. Everyone knows this, I'm sure, and it's probably annoying. I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember which one. I couldn't find it on my social media. But essentially that's what they were saying, that the biggest piece of advice that this person would give a writer is to not send it too soon. When you think it's ready, when you're excited to get it into the hands of an agent or a publisher, or maybe just even a writer's workshop, just sit on it for a bit and move on to something else entirely. Get completely out of the piece that you're working on and think about it. But I think I've done that. I've sent short stories out and gotten the rejections, the thousands of them, and then read the story and thought, well, of course it was rejected, you dummy. You should have, read it another 4,000 times. And in the book, you have a quote from Kevin Hardcastle, which I love: edit until your eyes bleed. So I want to talk to you about revision and the very difficult, aspirational, dreamlike moment you come to as a writer when you think, okay, it's ready. How does a writer know that they're there, that the piece is there, that the novel's there, that the poem is there?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is when you're no longer making it better, you're just making it different. And
Right.
and there are writers who do that just keep fiddling forever with line edits, and it's not necessarily better. So I think once you've gotten the feedback, it's structurally where you want it to be, and the there's a if it's narrative writing, that there's that character arc, you've got a satisfying ending, and that you've got it stylistically in shape. Then you need to give it to some people you trust and find out, is it time to send it out? And I teach creative writing at U of T's School of Continuing Studies, and my students often ask me, how do I know when I'm ready to send stuff out? And I tell them, somebody will tell you. Almost all of us can say we've had that experience, that if you're seeking feedback, whether that's from a library writer in residence or a workshop you're in, a course you're taking, other writers that you're working with, somebody will tell you, hey, you should really send this piece out. It's ready
Mhm,
for you to seek a broader readership for it.
mhm. Yeah, that's good. And I think anyone here who's a writer is more likely a reader as well. And I'm sure if you've read as widely as I hope you have, you've picked up a book that's been published and found, 5 or 6 things wrong with it, or 5 or 6 things that you would do differently. And the reality is every draft of a short story will get feedback.
Yes.
Right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and so finding that magic moment, I think, is probably the most difficult time. Kaylee, I'm just gonna because I just saw a couple of questions pop up about revision. Are there questions related to what we're talking about right now that we should?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it in one of the questions was, when is revision complete and how do you know when to send something out? I think you kind of just touched on it just there. I think that's kind of the main one about revision at this point.
Thank you. I saw a couple of them go, and I thought, if we're talking about revision, we'll go. And yeah, and Janice has just followed up with how to know revision is complete without feedback.
Yeah, I think feedback is essential. I think, you know, if you if you think that you're going to be able to step into the reader's shoes and have that objectivity, um, it's that's incredibly difficult. So I would, I've been in a writers group with two women for years. One of them is here. Um, and I don't send anything out, not even to my agent, who, is very kind and on my side, without them seeing it first and giving me feedback. And I find their comments so helpful. And sometimes it's just maybe a little line edit. And sometimes they'll say, Patricia, this just really isn't working. I think, you got to think about your overall structure.
Mhm.
So, but always it's useful to get feedback. So I think, um, given how hard it is, like how many rejections you're going to get for every piece you send out, you want to make sure that your piece is as polished as you can make it, and you need feedback to do that.
Mhm.
Does that answer the question of the person who asked it? Did I interpret your
Yeah.
question properly? Okay, good.
Thanks, Janice. And the flip side to that, you talk about in the book, you talk about the kind of plowing through the first draft. And it made me laugh because in the very first workshop that I was in, we had an incredible writer who was writing an incredible story, and he got tripped up on chapter 3 because of feedback that we had provided. And for 6 months, I think he submitted chapter 3, like, different iterations of chapter 3. And I didn't know the language back then, but when I read it in the book, I thought, yeah, just write it. Just, whether or not you're in a workshop sharing chapter by chapter by chapter, don't share the same chapter, move on to the next chapter. And I want you to elaborate on that kind of plow. How can you do that as a writer? Shut the self-critic up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I want to preface this by saying that, writers have very different processes, and I talk about that in the book, and you need to experiment with what works for you. But if you're able to write a fast, complete draft before you start revising, I do think that's the best way to do it. For one thing, it frees your right brain up to generate ideas without your left brain, muddying the waters by wanting to worry about how you're wording these ideas that you haven't even fully formed yet.
Yeah.
And I think the analogy I use in the book is, or something similar to that, that you're, deciding on wallpaper when you're not even sure if that wall is going to stay standing in the house that you're building.
Oh, I love that.
So if you can, if you can get the big picture, your full story, your full book, whatever it is, and then start revising, I do think that's an efficient process that gives you the biggest leeway to know what is this animal before you start fiddling with the details.
Yeah, I love that wall and house in a house analogy. That's brilliant. I just want to go back, Kaylee, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting your process. Janice posted so an online critique group, and the reason I'm just going to that specifically is because I meant to ask you about that with who reads your stuff. You touch on the book, a very important how to choose a workshop, how to choose an online critique group, who should be in there. And I want you to elaborate on that because I thought it was really important.
Yeah, I think it takes some work to find the right people. And it doesn't necessarily need to be reciprocal, because you don't need to have a fellow writer. What you need is an avid and analytic reader. So it can be someone, if you're writing a mystery and you have someone in your family who loves mysteries, you know, they might be the perfect person to give you feedback on your drafts, particularly if you give them specific questions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a group of writers. In fact, sometimes what can go wrong, I've been in groups like this where the writers are just writing to impress other writers and not thinking about who really are the readers who you want to buy this book at the end. So it is work. Well, I think one of the best places if you're looking for fellow writers to form a group with are workshops, reading series, places where you know you meet people and you see whether you're compatible. Also, that you're kind of at the same level. You know, you don't want to be working with someone who is way behind you in their level of expertise because they're not going to give you the kind of feedback that you want.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Janice, again for that question and for reminding me about that aspect. Um, so I want to talk, we're moving into now this idea of new writers. I want to talk to you about the importance of, I guess, coming into it with eyes wide open, with all of the tools necessary, with the idea of, I'm also reading uh, novelist as vocation. I love it. The idea that, you know, not everyone's born to write, as Haruki says, anyone can write a novel, but what is your list? I don't want to ask for the number one thing, but what are your list of pieces of advice that you would give a new writer, someone who's just coming into the Canadian publishing world?
So I think, first of all, you need to write and write and write. And all of us who have been writing for a while, when you tell someone you're a writer, you know, if you're sitting next to them on a plane or something like that, more often than not, they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, I'm going to write a book too. You know, I plan to write a novel, or I've got this memoir I'm going to write." And you know, you just want to kind of roll your eyes because it's like saying, "I'm going to become a professional hockey player," you know, or "I'm going to um, play trombone in the Philharmonic." And there's no sense that this is a serious craft that you need to master, that there's skills
Mhm.
you need to master. And you know, unless you're just going to you know, put a PDF up on and call that published work, which many people do. But
Mhm.
if you want to write something that I don't know, I think is worthy of people's time and reading, then you have to master the craft. So that takes a lot of practice. You've got to treat yourself like a professional, where you write and practice and learn all you can about the craft. And then I think simultaneously you need to learn about the business. I like to say that writing is an art, but publishing is a business.
Mhm.
So you need to know, how does the publishing business work in Canada? What do I do once I have polished pieces? And some of what you need to do is some networking and getting to know the people in the business. So you don't really want to wait, you know, and until you've got pieces ready. You probably want to start figuring out how the business works and even building some relationships, meaning even just following people on Twitter, or
Mhm.
getting to know people, other writers who might be able to mention you to their agent, or let you know about a grant that you should apply for, or something like that. That should happen long before you know, you feel completely ready to send out work.
Mhm.
So yeah, so honing your skills and learning about the industry.
Mhm. I love in the chapter where you talk about querying literary agents. I love that you say one of the ideas for a query letter is, I've been following you on Twitter, and I love what you said about this, that, and the other, which feeds my story idea. And I so agree with that. Someone, another person said, another writer, a couple of writers ago at Junction Reads mentioned the idea of finding a literary agent is finding your future best friend, right? That you don't just want to find someone who's going to advocate for your book. You want to find someone that you're going to be able to sit down with and have difficult conversations and cry about the work in progress, and someone who's going to love you as much as they love the work. And I feel like that goes back to what you were saying about sending stuff out too quickly and just wanting someone to love it, wanting someone to accept it and get it ready for publication. If you find the wrong agent, you're kind of, stuck in a bad relationship, I think.
Yeah, and it's incredibly difficult to find an agent in Canada. There are only 30, and you don't want to blow your chance. You don't want to send something out too early, because you don't really get a chance to fix it up and send it out again. Usually, if they've said no thanks, that's the end. You've closed that door for that manuscript anyway.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about your journey as a writer, but I wonder if at this point we should open it up. Kaylee, I'm not sure what list of questions you have and how everyone feels about opening it up for a more open discussion.
I have a couple we can throw in.
Okay.
And this kind of leads into the discussion that we were just having about writing and editing and things like that. And the question is, so much is made of having an authentic voice. How do you incorporate changes without losing the original voice of the piece?
Yeah, I think in the end, well, so first of all, you get to decide which changes to make. So I have a mug somewhere that somebody had made for me with one of my favorite quotations. I'm going to misquote it, but it's attributed to H.G. Wells: "No passion on earth equals the passion to alter someone else's draft." And I like to keep that in mind, that if you give your manuscript to someone, they will find things that you should change, right? They're doing their job well if they find things that you should change. So, you have to remind yourself you're the author. And if you feel like the changes being asked for are going to interfere with your authentic voice, then I wouldn't make those changes. But good editors aren't going to interfere with your voice. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to tell you when it's feeling inauthentic or over the top. If something is getting too smarmy or eye rolly, or anything that actually interferes with the voice, that's what a good editor will point out.
Anything else, Kaylee? Sorry.
Well, I think it would be nice to hear a little bit about Patricia's story, because then the rest of the questions are a little bit disparate. So we'll kind of do that, and then we'll come to the big random question section at the end.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning reading eclectically to better yourself as a writer, and you yourself are the author of short story, novel, an upcoming novel, and as an educator, I'm sure you have written a number of essays on writing, and including this book. I want to talk to you about how you came to be a writer and where your journey's going next with this new book.
So yeah, I started out as a very bad poet. In high school and the early years of university, I thought I was a poet. And in my novel, I made my last novel, The Dove in Bathurst Station, I made my character a failed folk singer. And I took those poems I wrote in high school and the early years of university, and I used them as the bad folk song lyrics. So throw anything out.
Brilliant.
Yes. Yes. And, they're terrible. They're really, really embarrassingly bad. And then I wrote the textbook, and then I started writing short stories. And actually the way that happened was I was working on a master's degree in education, and I signed up for a course that I thought was about the theory of writing, and it turned out we had to write pieces of memoir. And I was on my way to drop that class when I suddenly remembered the crafts that women did in the rural Alberta neighborhood that I lived in as a child, and I had this desperate urge to write about those crafts. So that's really what launched my writing journey, writing fiction, which is my preferred genre. And this latest book was my pandemic project when I wasn't feeling particularly creative.
Right. And this that you're working on right now, this is the novel that was inspired by having to write an index.
Ah, yes. So
That I want to know
I
about.
cheaped out. I could have hired someone to write the index, but I thought, oh, how hard can it be? I'll write this index. Um, and it was so tedious. And so just to entertain myself, when I got to the letters, I would think, um, T is tedious, terrible. And I would just come up with all these words. And then I suddenly thought, wait, I'm going to write an alphabet book. And so the novel that I'm about halfway through is called The Alphabet Book of Dating. Goes chapter A, chapter B, chapter C. It's a woman who is trying to find a man, and she starts internet dating. So that's all I'm ready to say about it right now.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of romance novels, and the seeking true love through an alphabet is I think going to be a joy to read.
Well, I see that Mary Lou is here, and she has called
Yep.
it an anti-romance novel. So
Right.
so we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I saw Mary Lou's name on the registration, I was very excited. She has been to Junction Reads, and it was a thrill.
She's a
Okay,
hero of
Kaylee.
mine. So
Yes,
yeah.
very much, very. I love her, so that's great. Okay, so here we go. I don't know, Kaylee, if we want to do the gallery, how people feel about the gallery, and opening up the questions. And if Kaylee asks your question, feel free to follow up with your own voice.
Yeah, I'll kind of start. There were a couple of questions at the beginning, and I think this is kind of a bigger discussion. So I'll just kind of launch into the fact that there's a lot of interest about grants and applying for grants, and writing that final report, and what are organizations looking for in the grant writing process. So there were quite a few, so I'll just kind of leave it as, let's talk about grants and applying, and what are people looking for as a kind of general topic, and then we can come back to a few more questions.
Yeah, so I write about grants in the book. There is a section on applying for grants, and some information in one of the appendices about places you can apply. And if there are also certain agencies and government arts councils that have specialized categories for writers who have been marginalized. Yep, there you go. And I think it's never a waste of time to apply for a grant, even though it's a crapshoot whether you're going to get one. But I think it moves you ahead in your project, because that project description that you have to write for them will help you to frame what you're doing and think about your work maybe more sort of commercially than when you just sit down by yourself and write. You think about, so what is this? What is this book? Who are my readers? What is this genre? And overall, how am I going to summarize what it's about? So that's a really useful thing to do. And then also just polishing, the 15, 20 or 30 pages, whatever it is for the grant application, is also useful, because again, it gives you a sense of what is the finished bit going to look like. It's like if you were putting together a whole complex of homes, it's sort of the model home, and there's a sense of pride in that you've got this piece, and what the rest of it might look like. like. So I'm all for applying for grants as long as you recognize that, sometimes you only have a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 20 or even larger chance of getting that grant. Um, and I would say the same things about that grant application as I do about, a query letter for an agent or a story that you're sending to a literary journal, that you've got to seek feedback and make sure that it is a level of polish, that is not going to disqualify you, because that you're it's very hard out there. There are a lot of people applying, and I think in the book I say you need to imagine that this is a sold out show that you're going to perform at, and not just some audition that you throw your jeans on and show up for, because you're not going to get it. So make it as polished as you can, get feedback on it. And yeah, I think the appendix lists creation grants. And then once you are published, there's lots of other grants as well. There are residencies and grants for travel and grants for research projects. So in Canada, we are very blessed with a robust grant system. And those of you here from Toronto, the Toronto Arts Council grant is due on June 15. And that's an amazing grant, because you only need to have had one piece published to qualify for that emerging writer level. Lots of grants, you need to have quite a track record of publication to qualify for them. But the Toronto grant is, you can just have placed a poem in some little journal, and that's good enough.
Mhm. And if anybody's interested, I know financially it can be a bit beyond to pay a grant writer or a grant support person, but Lindsay Ziervogel, who is a Canadian writer and also a grant writer and a grant supporter, is really supportive of writers. And I know that she has a bit of a scale when helping writers write grants. So if you want her contact information, feel free to reach out to me and I can share that with you. Again, it's paid, but getting help writing one grant is very helpful in all of the other applications you need to fill out. Kaylee. I love Louise alphabet.
Sorry, I'm adding Lindsay's grant writing details in the chat. So I was running back and forth. Amazing, great. I think that answers kind of, a lot of the broad, at least kind of, surface levels of granting. And there were a couple of questions kind of about the people who are reading it. So, for different projects, how important is it to have a beta reader on every project? And, do you need that for every project? And what is the importance of having a mentor? So, maybe someone you come back to repeatedly, who is published already and who has, more knowledge in the field.
So I'll address that second question first. I think one of the benefits of having a mentor or mentors is that they are ahead of you in the business of publishing. And that is so very useful. If you've got people who already have agents, already have some books out there. They're the people who, when you show up at a writing festival, they might introduce you to their agent or to some editors of independent presses who are accepting. So, in terms of networking, knowing people who are ahead of you is very useful. And I know networking, especially for writers, many of us, maybe most of us, are introverts, and it's kind of a horrifying thing. The lovely thing is you can do some of it online, right? Like you can just follow people on Twitter and engage with them that way. So you don't necessarily have to leave your home to do this. But I do think that there are huge benefits to knowing people who are ahead of you in the business side. And then in terms of, do you need beta readers or critique partners for everything. I think the more experienced you get, the more capable you are of critiquing your own voice, of stepping into the reader's shoes. And but then if you switch genres, then you might decide, oh, I really need feedback for this. I'm not sure what I'm doing, or I'm not sure if it's working. That might be more the place that you're at. So, I just think, why not get feedback before you send it out? The stakes are high. Rejection is far more likely than acceptance. So
Mhm.
why not do everything in your power to make it as good as it can be before you send it out?
That's great. Thank you. And I mean, this workshop is not about me, but I will say that I also work full time as a publicist, and being online with other authors is also so huge for just supporting each other. And, if you meet a bunch of authors that write historical fiction and then you write historical fiction, most writers are very supportive of one another and will shout each other out on Instagram and Twitter and whatever. So I know that I was not the one who was asked the question, but I will say in my professional life, writers having writer friends, even if it's just online, is very important. Okay, and then so we were talking about agenting, and we've talked about query letters, and how important it is to find an agent that you vibe with and connect with. But where is the timeline for finding an agent? Are you bringing them a complete finished product? Are you bringing them kind of early work or collection of works, and then kind of on top of that, how do you actually find that agent? So what is kind of the process for that?
Yeah, so let's just take a big step back there, because I would say that the majority of books that come, I know the majority of books that come out in Canada are by authors who do not have an agent.
Mhm.
It is very hard to get an agent in Canada because, as I said, there are only 30 agencies, and actually it's fewer chances than that, because you really have to select just one agent at an agency to submit your query to, and it's considered bad form to submit to multiple agents at a company. So and it can take a year to send out those queries. It takes ages to hear back. So many writers, unless they are writing something that they think is going to be a huge commercial success, um, they then it might be worth it to seek an agent, because you can only submit a book to the big presses with an agent. But Canada has 200 or more independent presses. You don't need an agent to submit to those independent presses. You can submit yourself, and you can submit simultaneously. So if you think that, if what you're writing is short stories or literary fiction or a memoir, and you're not a huge celebrity, some kind of creative nonfiction that's not likely to have an international appeal and sell thousands of copies, then you may be better off just deciding you're not going to spend a year trying to find an agent and possibly fail. Instead, you're just going to submit directly to some of those independent presses. And then you do your research about who publishes your genre, who's open to submission. Maybe you've met some of those people at writing festivals or reading series, and you submit directly to them. So I think I want to strongly recommend that as a path to publication, because a lot of the writers I know have found that the process to try and find an agent is slow, and in the end not successful. And
Mhm.
then this always gets a follow-up question of, well, can I just get a US agent? And my answer to that is, if a Canadian agent isn't interested in you because they don't think your book is going to be an international splash, it's unlikely that an American agent would be either. So again, if you're writing something that you're a celebrity, or you're married to a celebrity and you're going to write the tell-all book, or there's something else, a nonfiction book, and you already have a huge platform, then by all means you might want to spend the time trying to find an agent and submitting to the large presses. But there's less and less that a large press can do for you that an independent press doesn't as well. So 10 years ago, we all thought, ooh, the end all and be all is getting an agent and a large press. And I think that's less the case than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. And that you talk about in the book, the number of rejections quite famous authors receive. And I feel like in that same vein, if you submit your work to every literary agent available in Canada, and at the end of the year they've all rejected it, that can't help but speak to you as a writer. Like, am I terrible? Am I a horrible writer? Like, everybody's rejected it. And I totally agree with you. I think that, simultaneous submissions to a bunch of independent presses is, especially because you say, and you mention a few literary journals and a few places that give feedback. And I feel like, a rejection is one thing, but I've said, and a number of writer friends have agreed, a rejection that gives feedback and like positive insight into the work is sometimes way better than an acceptance.
Yeah, it can really move you forward, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kaylee, any more questions?
I think we've covered most of them. There were quite a few that kind of, linked and wove into each other, or we kind of touched on them in earlier discussion. So I think we will wrap our questions there, as we're almost at 6.
Yay. I am so excited. Dundurn Press has given Junction Reads 2 copies of this incredible book to raffle off. Patricia Westerhof, thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for sitting with us today and chatting about it, and writing and creative writing and publishing in Canada. We're going to do the raffle, and I'm hoping, since this is our last event of the season, that all of you will stick around for a minute so that we can get a screenshot. We're going to share it on social media as additional publicity for the reading series and for Patricia's book, if that's okay. Kaylee, the raffle, please. Drum roll.
Yes, it's always my favorite part with my little hedgehog container. All right, our first winner for today is Amy Louise L.
Woo! Louise, are you here?
Yes, hello, thank you.
Yay!
Great.
Amazing. And our second winner for today is Janice Coleman.
Yay!
Yay!
I have the book.
You have that's totally fine. We you can nominate a winner. You can either have it sent to you and gift it to a friend, or you can save the postage and save the gifting and send me the name and address of a friend, and Dundurn will send it to them directly, and might even include a little note saying that it's from you.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, Kaylee can raffle another name.
Let Kaylee raffle another name.
There you go.
But thank you.
Of course.
That's always the tricky thing of people coming to events, is sometimes they've already got the book and that's why they're tuning in. But that's always fun. It gives me another chance to use my fun little. Sorry, sometimes I pull like 5 at once and it's a bit complicated. All right, our second winner for today. Oh, no, I put Janice back in. Janice, you were very lucky. You won twice by accident. Sorry, everyone. That was my own fault. Okay, our second winner for today, I'm going to try, I think, is Ella Pavelski. Ella Pavelski.
Elle, I saw you 5 minutes ago.
Hi, yes, hi, Allison.
Hi.
Thank you so much. That's lovely. Wow.
Awesome. Okay,
That's
send me,
amazing.
you know my email address. You can send
Yep,
me an
I'll
email.
drop you a line separately.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank
Cool.
you so much. It's so sad that Kaylee and I have no idea what's happening next year. We don't know. We haven't confirmed a physical space, and I'm not entirely sure when we're going to get started. But again, I will reiterate how grateful I am, Patricia, that you joined us for our last event of the season. I think this was great. I think everyone on YouTube is going to enjoy it. So I'll say my final thanks to you all for joining us this season, and thanks again to Kaylee, who does so much technical stuff. Honestly, this would be a complete failure if I didn't have her there. And so if everyone wants to jump on, Kaylee's gonna take a gallery photo and everyone can wave, and we'll get a photo.
Sorry, one more. I'm trying to get the one so that, you know, whoever's blinking, I've still got you. Okay, amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank
Hi,
you so
Heather.
much for having me. Thank
Thank
you.
Hi, Heather.
you again,
Pleasure.
and good luck with this. And everyone who's got a copy, everyone who has picked it up at the library or purchased it at an independent bookstore, tell all of your writer friends. It really is for new writers, for writers who've been around for a long time. There is something in here for everybody. Again, thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
great summer, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.